20th century. The Battle of Jutland during the First World War was the biggest and the deadliest. Britain had more ships and superior firepower. The public expected a walkover. But the outcome of the battle shook the nation to its core. Thousands of British sailors lost their lives in less than 24 hours. In the dead of night on the 30th of May 1916, the British Grand Fleet, led by Admiral Sir John Jellicoe, slipped anchor from Scapa Flow in Scotland. At the same time, his Vice Admiral, Sir David Beatty, led out an advance party, including 6 battlecruisers. They set off 200 miles south. With 151 ships and 100,000 men, it was the largest assembly of the most powerful fleets the world had ever known. Jellicoe and Beatty were to rendezvous on the 31st of May and lie in wait. They knew from radio intercepts that the unsuspecting Germans would be venturing into the North Sea that day.
In 1916, the German commander-in-chief was convinced that he had to do something and that he had to risk something. He did not want to risk his whole fleet. What he wanted to do is, according to Operations Plan Number 1, to lure out the British Grand Fleet and sink as many ships as possible. But he never wanted to risk a big battle with the Grand Fleet under Jellicoe and Beatty.
The British fleet was commanded by 2 men who couldn't have been more different. Jellicoe came from a modest background. After a conventional education, he joined the Navy as an officer cadet, working his way up to the top.
Jellicoe was a very attractive personality, very thorough, very human, very good manager. But Jellicoe had one great defect, in my opinion. He was far too cautious.
By contrast, Beatty was born into a well-to-do Anglo-Irish family. His early education focused on horsemanship, hunting, and how to be a gentleman.
Beatty was a man of style. He even designed his own uniform. He was a raffish.
Just a few hours after Jellicoe and Beatty left port, Admiral Reinhard Scheer, commander of the German High Sea Fleet, set off. With him were 99 ships, an armada a third smaller than the British fleet. It included his scouting party of 5 battlecruisers under the command of Vice Admiral Franz Hipper. At 2:20 on the afternoon of the 31st of May, sightings of Hipper's battlecruisers were reported to Beatty. Without waiting for backup or informing Jellicoe, the British battlecruiser commander turned southeast in pursuit. An hour later, Hipper spotted Beatty advancing towards him. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for. At 10 to 4 in the afternoon, Hipper's flagship, the Lutzow, opened fire. This rare photograph captures that dramatic moment. The Lutzow and Beatty's own flagship, HMS Lion, engaged in a fierce firefight. A 12-inch shell from the Lutzow scored a direct hit on Lion's central turret. 99 men were killed. Worse was to come. 14 minutes into the exchange of fire, at the end of Beatty's line, HMS Indefatigable was hit by 3 German shells. Soon afterwards, she was struck again on her forward turret. At 2 minutes past 4, observers reported a huge explosion. She sank with the loss of 1,017 lives. Aboard the expedition vessel, Innes and Nick are 100 years. New multi-beam scans are a revelation.
Even in the few minutes that I've had since it first started appearing on the computer screens, when I can say straight away that it is going to change the way we look at the last few minutes of this vessel. I mean, it was destroyed with over 1,000 men on board. There were only 2 survivors. The multi-beam image is showing us a pattern of that destruction that is tragic, horrific, and incredibly violent, and the explanation why 1,000 people died.
There were no movie cameras at Jutland. One ship that took part in the battle, HMS Barham, was caught on film when it was sunk in the Second World War. The film of those terrifying last few moments gives some idea of what it must have been like for the men aboard HMS Indefatigable. A first-hand account by one of the only 2 survivors who had climbed the ship's mast gives a glimpse of the carnage.
There was a terrific explosion on board the ship. The magazines went. I also saw guns going up in the air, just like matchsticks. Bodies and everything. Within half a minute, she turned right over and was gone. I was 180 foot up and was thrown clear of the ship. When I came up, there was another fellow, Jimmy Green. We got a piece of wood. A few minutes afterwards, some shells came over us and Jim was minus his head.
The multi-beam reveals Indefatigable's final moments in forensic detail, which were to suffer an even greater catastrophe. The Queen Mary was one of the biggest and most powerful of all the battle cruisers. The pride of the Royal Navy. Now she found herself under relentless bombardments by not just 1, but 2 German battle cruisers. Less than an hour into the battlecruiser action, she too exploded. She plummeted to the sea floor. The Queen Mary was Britain's biggest naval loss of the First World War. 1,266 sailors killed in an instant.
This whole seabed is a cemetery. There were very, very few survivors. The majority of the crew, they would have had no idea what would have happened to them. No idea what was going on above, and would have died.
The forepart suddenly shot ahead, listing slightly to port and veered towards us. In so doing, we noticed the height of the bow wave rising. This sorry load of humanity, listing further, now slowing up gently, slid into the deep. Oh, the sight of those poor fellows. I was to experience many dreams. Nightmares, more appropriate, for months afterwards.
In the case of Queen Mary, the